Let me begin by extending a warm welcome to all. Being the convener of the conference, it is my pleasant duty to welcome you all, and of course to thank Mr. Ravi Pandit, one of our own technology leaders, to give a wonderful keynote address, giving the promise of technology that is there, provided we manage our affairs within this century. So my opening slide is the Earth. Half of it is above the ground, half of it is below the ground. That environment, Earth environment, has been very well balanced for millions of years. And we've had a very stable environment, Earth environment, which we benefited from. Now, anthropogenic activities have seriously disturbed that balance. And that is why we are at a stage where our whole stability, our whole progress, our whole, whether it is economy, whether it is environment, whether it is livelihood, everything is under threat. So my talk is going to be climate instability and economic uncertainty. So climate instability I'm talking about is why, how, and where are we going? I'm now just about turning 80, and if I take my generation as the past, in the last 70 years, world population has jumped from 2.5 billion to 7.7 billion, more than 3 times. At the same time, the energy consumption has increased 45 times, which is huge. And of course, if you look at the nature, global wildlife has reduced by 53%. Obviously, it is because of the compromise of their habitat, and therefore the loss of the forest cover and the natural environment. Most of the energy that humanity has progressed on comes from the fossil fuel, emitting CO2 and other greenhouse gases. But even if we just look at the CO2 concentration in atmosphere, pre-industrial level was about 280 ppm, and now we are already at 415 ppm. It is increasing roughly at about 2 ppm per year, which means unless we check the emissions, we are edging towards 450 and 500, and you can easily understand what the average temperature would be. Fortunately, the greenhouse gases have been very helpful in stabilizing the atmosphere at an average 15 degrees centigrade. Obviously, some places are more hotter than, and some places are colder, but that is what has provided the humanity to progress. And global warming and climate changes, unfortunately, are very slow and cumulative process. So it has been happening for 100, 200 years, but it is now that it's staring us in the face. We are seeing devastating effects that now the overall public has woken up, and as our keynote speaker said, there's a lot of awareness increasing, and so many things are happening. Average 1% rise in atmosphere and oceans means some parts are already more hotter, as I said. Hence, all upper atmospheric currents, what we call jet streams, and oceanic flows, they are also temperature dependent. They have all been disturbed, and that's the effect we are seeing, causing extreme weather events, sudden higher precipitation, heat waves, droughts, and bushfires, and so on and so forth. Cyclonic patterns have changed in increasing as well as intensity. Devastation due to climatic instability are already evident and bound to increase unless we drastically reduce it. In fact, since all this is cumulative and it's there already in the atmosphere, even if we stop dead today, next 10 years are going to see some hysteresis effect. Well, it's not something new. UNFCCC, the Framework for Climate Change Control, was established in 78. Kyoto Protocol was signed in 92. Then, of course, we had the Paris Agreement. But despite all the global focus and promises, very little is changing as yet because our emissions are still increasing. The IPCC report 21, as we all know, has waved the red flag that unless we drastically reduce emission within the next 8-10 years, this decade, we will be hurting not only livelihood but also economy. So then we are looking at what is the importance of this decade? Why are we calling it the decade of change? Unless serious and coordinated global efforts are taken, in the next 10 years, several regenerative actions will take place. They are called the tipping points, where the nature takes over and the human control will be much less effective. For instance, melting of ice sheets in Greenland, and they are exposing the permafrost areas that will start emitting methane gas, which is almost 28 times more potent for for global warming. Similarly, huge ice shelves melting at Antarctica, that's a landmass, and if the ice shelves melt and fall in the sea level rise will be affecting everybody else. Exploitation of forest for business, for money gains, has already reduced the green cover by 15 to 20%. And of course, now we have forest fires that are damaging natural sequestration capacities. The Amazon rainforest, best known as a carbon sink, people are now wondering whether it's slowly going to get into a carbon emitting area. Economic recovery from losses due to pandemic, world has already seen the effect. Well, as Ravi Pandit said, every challenge is an opportunity, and this is the opportunity for us to understand that the so-called recovery that we are talking about today from the pandemic losses is a unique opportunity to go for the development of environmentally green development, but unfortunately that's not yet happening. To give an example, what we call an Earth Overshoot Day, which marks on which day we have exhausted the year's quota of natural resources, that has come down to 27 July last year, 21, which means we are borrowing from the future generations, and in a way, at a rate that cannot be compensated. So unfortunately, I have to paint this gloomy picture because that's where we are. Well, the economics is a mechanism where wealth creation is designed on predictable parameters. All economic planning includes foreseeable risks to growth and progress. Climate instability now constitutes the largest unpredictable risk. So much so that World Economic Forum has declared, has analyzed, that every US dollar invested in climate mitigation action today could account for almost 5 times as much benefit in the next 10 years. World today is going through several unknowns. We have the climate change, of course, then we have the technological evolution, the robotics, the AI, and so on and so forth. We have the zoonotic diseases that are spreading more because of the higher temperature. So economy has suffered on multiple counts for all these unpredictable reasons, and humanity is already seeing that how the economy takes a backseat when human livelihood is at stake. Economists are already sensing the dangers, and several alternatives are evolving to progress with an alternative, with an economic model that will work within the planetary boundaries. One example, of course, is the donut economy that was proposed by Kate Raworth. Another point that is relevant is a carbon tax. Currently, it is in the range of $30 to $60, but that is to compensate for the damages that are caused by the global warming that has already happened. And as we progress ahead, I think these things are going to go on increasing. I would say that these are pragmatic economic measures to effectively reduce CO2 emissions, because once you put a price to it, then there is a different way of looking at it. So there is actually a social cost of carbon emission. Economists have evolved government policies who evolve government policies talk of the social cost of carbon, a, a warming Earth due to the mainly CO2 emissions from fossil fuel burning. It is the cost of economic damages due to global warming, and damages estimated in different countries is divided by the emissions to calculate the cost per metric ton. And of course, famous economist Dr. William Nordhaus in 2018 was given Nobel Prize for actually quantifying it and measuring it. Like in economics, they say there are no free lunches. So far, I think mankind has been having free lunches. Now it's time to pay. Although yet to be strictly enforced as a carbon tax, economists are already factoring the social cost of carbon in their profit loss calculations in the annual budget process. Estimating economic losses due to every 1 degree centigrade rise is now a standard practice, and all those who emit emission will be responsible for their share of payment. At a rough calculation, right now it has been accepted that every degree centigrade rise corresponds to 48 euro per degree, and the overall economic damage all across the world could go into trillions. This is perhaps the direct linkage of economy with a measurable environmental degradation. And although the actual cost of energy may be higher, and as this becomes measurable, the social cost of carbon may also increase eventually. US, China, India are the top carbon emitting countries who will face the biggest economic losses. India's cost of carbon emission was estimated to be about $86 per ton. And therefore, for every extra ton that we are emitting, we are paying that cost. And so the important thing is that this is one mechanism that the revenue that can be generated from this kind of a tax can be used for transition to green energy. And then, of course, because the green energy will have very small social cost of carbon. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, where I'm asking for a radical change in understanding that economy is a subset of society, which by itself is a subset of the earth environment. Whereas earlier, if you see the left diagram, the economy was the larger force, larger focus, and environment and society were smaller focus. Then we came to almost equitable understanding of equitable share. And finally, we are understanding that environment is the largest contributor. So going forward, if I may call it way forward, way ahead, to avoid for future disruptions, new economies must become distributive and work towards spreading the benefits of progress to many, thus reducing inequality. It's a social issue, but again, if we do not reduce inequality, then the antisocial elements will always take advantage of it. This can reduce the potential dangers of escalating social tensions. As I said, knowledge, power, and wealth can be more distributive if our technology and institutions become more participative in this globally interdependent world that we have seen. Now, no country is an island, and therefore everybody affects everybody else. Instead of fossil fuel dependence and mass manufacture of the 20th century, we now have many other options. We have the renewable energy power, we have the digital platforms, we have the 3D printing, just to give you some example. So I'm saying all future designs must focus on high resilience for the real sustainability. Sustainability is a much maligned word, but we are now coming to a stage where sustainability must become the actual mantra. Only then we can focus on thriving within the social and ecological boundaries and unleash the creativity of the real qualitative upgrade to life. So ultimately, I'm saying whatever we do in future must be oriented towards uh, qualitative improvement of our human livelihood. So it is time to unshackle the old dogmas and bring in all ingenuity to design the future. So the future needs to be designed within this decade, so that what we do after this decade will be all contributive, constructive, and um, um, inclusive. And that is a challenge. I think I'll end here because there are many speakers on speaking on various other aspects, and at the end of the conference we'll have all the information put together. So let me end here. Thank you.